Welcome back to the Entrepreneur's Blueprint. I'm your host, Courtney Cook. And today we're going to talk about why your team isn't dropping the ball, even though it might feel like it. And maybe the problem is you. I have been in many team meetings on a Monday morning. We're all moving fast. I mention the thing that needs to be done, and someone nods in agreement, or we all kind of nod and we agree and we move on to the next item. Then we get to Friday and nothing has happened. Like, what happened with that thing? Did anyone touch it? Apparently not. Well, this can be really frustrating and feel like the wind is knocked out of you, or maybe you're just disappointed. Like your team cannot ever follow through. And I completely understand it. I've been there. However, just because I feel like they dropped the ball, I don't think that's the real problem. There is obviously a gap between my expectation and their execution isn't a character flaw on their part. It's most likely a process or a system flaw on me, or the way we structure our meetings, or the way each person's job description is structured or lacks structure. So here's what I think is actually happening. The first thing is just in general, I think many founders completely skip the confirmation step. So what I mean by that is we all nod that this thing has to get done. And the thing is I think a lot of founders have already moved on mentally. Like that conversation feels done when actually it isn't. But I've moved on, and so I'm moving on to the next thing because my brain ping pongs around. The second thing that I think is going on is because assigning a hard deadline feels like distrust or micromanagement, especially with people you like. So therefore, it just doesn't happen. The third thing is that you assume they know what done looks like because in your head, it's crystal clear. It makes perfect sense. But this is actually pretty dangerous because you are assuming that you have shared context. So actually, you have to share what done looks like. And lastly, ultimately, I think this happens because there's a lack of clarity in everyone's roles and responsibilities, like I alluded to earlier. If this is in your job description that you are responsible for exactly XYZ, there's no question about who needs to take the next step and what the next step is. So, for example, let's say you wanted to get started or get a new paid ad running on Meta. Is this you as the founder? Is this your responsibility to make sure this happens? Is it you to take the next step to create this video? Like, what happens? Is it a group of people that actually have to take this across the finish line? Ideally, it just needs to be a single source that you can lean on. And if it isn't realistic, I realize every situation is different, every business is different. And sometimes it's not realistic to make it a single owner just based on the team dynamics, or just, there could be a whole host of reasons. So maybe it's not realistic to make it a single owner and it's multiple people. That is when it's especially critical to define who is to take the next step and what the expectation is for when it needs to be done and when it needs to be running by. So when does that ad need to be running? And also define what is the next step so that you can get the ball rolling. If you're in the scenario where you need to build in a confirmation step, so it's not super clear in your job description that, Courtney is to fill out the scorecard on Mondays at this time. If you're in a scenario where, okay, it is a little bit of a gray area of who takes the next step, that's when you have to build in a confirmation step, and that needs to happen in the team meeting or in another avenue. Here is the framework that I want you to use when you're building in this confirmation step. So the first thing is define the owner. It's one name. It's not the team. It's not you and Sarah. It's one person who is accountable. Next, I want you to define the due date. It needs to be a specific date, not soon, not or the end of the week. If it doesn't have an actual date, it needs to be like by end of business on Friday. If it doesn't have a date, it doesn't exist on anyone's calendar or their radar. The last thing I want you to do as part of this framework is define the definition of done. What does finished actually look like? Is it a draft? Is it a sent email? Is it a signed contract? It has to be spelled out. So when you say you want this ad live, do you legit want it running, or do you want it in a place ready to be approved and then it's running by Monday? Like, spell it out. So just a reminder, those 3 steps in this framework is: number 1, define the owner; number 2, define the due date; and number 3, define the definition of done. So here's what this might look like in real life. Let's say if the scenario is that we are creating a product and we need the content handed off to a designer so that the designer has everything they need to start designing the final print files. So what you're going to say is you're going to type in Slack to Sarah, "Hey, Sarah, we have to have the final content completed by end of business on Friday. We need to have it in a place to where we can hand it to the designer so that she can start doing everything that needs to be done." You've defined the due date, end of business Friday. You've defined the definition of done. The designer needs to be able to take it and run with it. And you've reached out specifically to Sarah. You can end that message with, "Do you have any questions? Do you need anything else?" And hopefully her response is, "Nope, got it, I'm on it." Or she asks questions. That's great. The same thing would happen in a meeting. You would make sure in a meeting where it's different in Slack, you have a whole group of people in your meeting, you actually have to say Sarah's name and look at her in the video and wait for her to confirm, "Yes, got it." That's the difference between how you would handle that via Slack and in a team meeting. At the end of the day, you want to build a team that can operate without you in the room. Every uncleared task is taxing on your capacity, and it's taxing on theirs as well. You cannot scale on vibes or implied expectations with your team, and a lack of clarity also makes your team feel the uncertainty of where they stand with you and with the rest of the team. Honestly, I do not think in these sort of scenarios, I don't think it's possible to over communicate. So if you feel like you're over communicating, you're probably communicating exactly the amount you should be. My challenge for you this week is sometime before the end of this week, look at everything you've handed off in the last few days and ask yourself, does each one of these have an owner, a date, and a definition of done? Fix the ones that don't, define those things out, and let me know, please, how this works for you. I want to kind of wrap this up here and also point this to scripture. So Paul puts it perfectly, I think, in 1 Corinthians 14:8. If the trumpet does not sound a clear call, who will get ready for battle? He was talking about communication in the church, but the principle is the same in your business. If your team isn't moving, it might not be because they're unwilling. It might be because the signal was never clear enough to act on. Your job as the leader is to be the trumpet. So make the call clear. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If this is a topic that you enjoyed, do you mind sharing this episode with a friend or leaving a review? Your feedback goes a long way in helping me reach more listeners who want to apply their faith to their business. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a great rest of your week.